Hello and welcome to Faith in Every Step. Today we are going to talk about Moses. Moses' story began in chaos. Pharaoh had commanded every Hebrew baby boy be killed, but even in darkness, God was writing deliverance. His mother Jochebed hid him for 3 months. When she could no longer protect him, she placed him in a basket and set it afloat on the Nile. Not as surrender, but as faith in motion. The same river that should have taken his life became the path toward destiny. Downstream, Pharaoh's daughter discovered the basket. The cry of a helpless child moved the heart of a princess, and in one divine moment, a slave child was welcomed into a royal home. Moses grew up in Pharaoh's palace, trained in leadership and power, yet something deeper stirred inside him. He belonged to another people, one crying out for freedom. Even as a child of privilege, Moses could never escape the tug of God's purpose. Every lesson in the palace, every glance toward the suffering Hebrews was preparation. God was shaping a deliverer in the very house of the oppressor. Your beginning might look uncertain, your surroundings confusing, but so did Moses. What feels like chaos may be the current of purpose, carrying you exactly where God intends. Nothing in your start disqualifies you from your destiny. Moses' story is just beginning, but soon the prince will face a choice that changes everything. The baby rescued from the river grew into a man of strength and wisdom. Moses, now a prince in Pharaoh's palace, had everything: power, comfort, and influence. Yet inside, a quiet restlessness stirred. Every time he saw the Hebrew slaves laboring under the whip, something in him broke. One day, the tension exploded. Moses saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew slave and, in anger, struck the Egyptian dead. Fear gripped him instantly. He buried the body in the sand, but the secret didn't stay hidden. Word spread, and Pharaoh sought his life. In one moment, Moses lost everything: the palace, the title, the security. The prince became a fugitive, running into the desert with nothing but guilt and regret. The wilderness became his teacher. The hot wind, the endless silence, the isolation, all stripped him of pride and power. He found refuge in Midian, where he married Zipporah and tended sheep for 40 years. To others, it looked like a wasted life. But God often does his best work in the waiting. The same hands that once held a scepter now held a shepherd's staff. And every sunrise in that quiet desert was shaping him for a greater calling. Moses had been trained in Pharaoh's palace to lead men, but in God's wilderness, he learned to follow. And as Moses guided his flock toward Mount Horeb, he noticed something unusual: a bush burning brightly, but not consumed. He turned aside to look closer, unaware that this moment, in the stillness of the desert, would ignite the greatest encounter of his life. Moses stepped closer to the flames. The bush burned, but its branches never turned to ash. Then came a voice from within the fire. "Moses, Moses." He answered, "Here I am." "Do not come any closer," said the voice. "Take off your sandals, for the place where you stand is holy ground." The desert that once felt like exile had become sacred. God spoke again. "I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I have seen the suffering of my people in Egypt and heard their cries. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring them out." Moses' heart pounded. The very place he had fled from was now the place God was sending him back to. "Who am I that I should go?" he stammered. God answered, "I will be with you." Still, doubt lingered. "What if they don't believe me?" the Lord asked. "What is in your hand?" "A staff," Moses replied. "Throw it on the ground." The staff turned into a serpent. Moses jumped back, then obeyed God's command to take it again, and it became a staff once more. God showed him his power, yet Moses hesitated. "Lord, I'm not good with words," he said. The Lord replied, "Who gave man his mouth? Now go, I will help you speak." Even then, Moses pleaded, "Please send someone else." God's patience thinned, but his mercy remained. "Your brother Aaron will speak for you," he said. The call was clear: no more running, no more hiding. As Moses left the mountain, staff in hand, he knew this was bigger than his fear. The same God who met him in the wilderness was now sending him into the heart of Egypt to challenge a king and free a nation. Moses descended Mount Horeb with a quiet resolve. The desert behind him had become his classroom. Now Egypt awaited, the place of his failure and the stage for God's power. He left as a fugitive. He would return as a messenger of deliverance. With his staff in hand and God's promise in his heart, Moses set out with his family. Each step stirred old memories: the palace, the mistake, the fear. But this time, he wasn't running. He was walking in obedience. God warned him on the journey. "When you return to Egypt, perform the wonders I've shown you, but Pharaoh's heart will be hardened." God didn't promise ease, only his presence. Along the way, Moses met Aaron, two brothers separated for decades, now reunited by divine calling. Moses told Aaron everything, and together they returned to Egypt, not as fugitives, but as servants of the Almighty. When they gathered the elders of Israel, Aaron spoke the words God had given. Then he performed the signs with Moses' staff, and the people believed. They bowed down and worshipped, knowing God had not forgotten them. But Pharaoh would not bend. When Moses and Aaron stood before him, their message was clear. Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, let my people go. Pharaoh's reply was cold and proud. Who is the Lord that I should obey his voice? And with those words the battle began, not between nations, but between pride and purpose, power and faith. The desert had prepared the messenger. Now the confrontation of kingdoms was about to unfold. Pharaoh's words still echoed. Who is the Lord that I should obey his voice? That single sentence would unleash a chain of power that Egypt had never seen. Moses and Aaron stood by the Nile, the same river that once carried Moses to safety. Now, it would become the first sign of judgment. At God's command, Moses struck the water with his staff. The river turned to blood, fish died, the air stank, and the people cried out. But Pharaoh's heart stayed hard. Then came frogs, covering the streets, the beds, even Pharaoh's palace. When they finally died, Egypt reeked. Still, Pharaoh would not yield. Next came gnats, then swarms of flies. They filled the homes of the Egyptians but avoided the land of Goshen, where God's people lived. The message was clear. Egypt's gods had no power, yet Pharaoh's pride refused to bend. Disease struck the livestock, boils covered the people. Then hail fell from the sky, followed by locusts that devoured what remained. Each plague tore down another false god, stripping Egypt of strength and pride. Still Pharaoh clung to his throne, blind to mercy, deaf to warning. Finally, darkness fell, thick and unbroken. For 3 days, Egypt sat in fear, while light still shone over God's people. But one more plague remained, one final night that would bring both judgment and deliverance. The time of waiting was ending. Freedom was coming, but it would cost a life. Egypt was silent, the air was heavy, a calm before the storm. Pharaoh's pride had stood through blood, frogs, hail, and darkness. But now, God would strike at the heart of Egypt's power. The Lord spoke to Moses, I will bring one more plague upon Pharaoh. After that, he will let you go. Every firstborn in Egypt would die, from the palace to the slave's hut. But for God's people, there would be a way of escape, a sign of mercy written in blood. Each family was to take a spotless lamb, one without defect. They would sacrifice it at twilight and place its blood on the doorposts of their homes. The Lord said, when I see the blood, I will pass over you. No plague will touch you. Inside, families gathered. The fire crackled. They ate in haste, ready to leave, a staff in hand, sandals on their feet. Outside, death moved through Egypt. From Pharaoh's palace to the poorest home, a cry rose in the night, like none before. But where the blood covered the door, there was peace. The promise held true. God's judgment passed over his people. Before dawn, Pharaoh's defiance broke. Go, he said, leave Egypt and serve the Lord as you have said. The Israelites left quickly. No time to waste, no time to look back. 400 years of bondage ended in one night, and the nation walked out under the covering of God's promise. The blood of the Lamb had spared them, a shadow of a greater deliverance yet to come. And as the first light rose over the desert, freedom began. The night air filled with footsteps, thousands of Israelites walking into freedom. Their torches flickered like stars across the desert. After 400 years, they were finally leaving Egypt behind, but freedom was followed by fear. Pharaoh's heart hardened once more, and he gathered his army, horses, chariots, and soldiers, to chase them down. When the Israelites reached the Red Sea, their hope turned to panic. The sea blocked their way forward, and behind them thundered the army of Egypt. Cries rose from the people. Why did you bring us here to die? Moses stood before them, holding his staff high. Do not be afraid, stand firm, and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring today. Then God spoke. Raise your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea. As Moses obeyed, a mighty wind swept through the night. The waters split apart, forming towering walls on both sides, and dry ground appeared between them. The people walked across, step by step, through what had been impossible. Pharaoh's army followed, but when the last Israelite stepped onto the far shore, God commanded Moses again, stretch out your hand. The waters crashed down, swallowing Egypt's might. The sea closed and silence followed, broken only by songs of freedom. Miriam led the people in praise. The Lord has triumphed gloriously. The horse and rider he has thrown into the sea. What looked like death became deliverance. What seemed like the end became the beginning of a new journey, one that would test their hearts and reveal their faith. The roar of the sea faded behind them. Ahead stretched the vast wilderness. silent, endless, and dry. The people who had seen the waters part now faced a different challenge: the waiting. At first, there was celebration, but as the days grew hotter and food grew scarce, gratitude turned into grumbling. "Did you bring us here to die of hunger?" they cried. They had seen God's power, but now they had to trust His presence. Freedom was not the end of the story, it was the beginning of faith. Moses prayed, and God answered with mercy. Each morning, the people woke to find something covering the ground, thin, white flakes like dew. They asked, "What is it?" Moses said, "It is the bread the Lord has given you to eat." They called it manna, which means "what is it?" Every morning it appeared, that enough for each day, but no more. Those who tried to hoard it found it spoiled by the next sunrise. God was teaching them to depend on Him daily, not on what they could store. When they grew thirsty, He told Moses to strike a rock, and water poured out in abundance. Once again, the impossible became reality. Through hunger, thirst, and wandering, God was shaping His people, not just rescuing them from Egypt, but teaching them how to walk with Him. The wilderness revealed what freedom really meant, not living without struggle, but learning to trust God when there's nothing else to hold on to. Day by day, manna fell. Day by day, God proved faithful. And though the people did not yet see the promised land, the same God who opened the sea was walking with them through the desert. The wilderness tested the people more each day. When their water ran out, fear turned to anger. "Why did you bring us out of Egypt to die of thirst?" they shouted. Moses cried out to God, desperate and exhausted. The Lord said, "Take your staff and strike the rock at Horeb." Moses obeyed, and as his staff hit the stone, water burst out, pouring through the desert. The people drank until they were satisfied. Once again, God turned their lack into provision. But soon, a new threat came. The Amalekites attacked, fierce warriors from the desert. Moses told Joshua to gather men for battle. As they fought below, Moses climbed a nearby hill, lifting his staff toward heaven. When his hands were raised, Israel prevailed. When they dropped, the enemy gained ground. Aaron and Hur stood beside him, holding up his arms until the sun set. By nightfall, Amalek was defeated. Victory didn't come from strength or skill, it came through faith and endurance. Moses built an altar and named it, "The Lord is my banner." It was a reminder that every battle, every need, every victory came from God alone. Through thirst and through war, God was teaching His people to trust Him, not just as their deliverer, but as their defender. And as they moved forward through the desert, the same God who gave water from the rock would lead them toward a mountain, where heaven itself would speak. After a long journey, Israel camped at the foot of Mount Sinai. The air was still, yet heavy with God's presence. This was where heaven would speak. Moses climbed the mountain, and thunder rolled across the sky. Lightning flashed, and smoke covered the peak like a thick cloud. The voice of God echoed through the desert. "You have seen what I did in Egypt. Now obey my voice, and you will be my treasured people." The people trembled and agreed. For 3 days they prepared, hearts pounding in awe. Then, on the third morning, the mountain blazed with fire. Trumpet sounds filled the air. The ground shook beneath their feet. Moses stepped into the smoke to meet with God. There, the Lord spoke 10 commands, 10 words of life. "Worship only me. Do not make idols. Honor my name. Keep the Sabbath. Honor your parents. Do not kill. Do not commit adultery. Do not steal. Do not lie. Do not covet." Each command was a reflection of His love, a guide for a people learning to walk in freedom. The people stood terrified and said, "Let God not speak to us directly. Moses, speak to Him for us." So Moses became the bridge between heaven and earth, carrying God's word to His people. Fire burned on the mountain as God wrote His law on stone, but His desire was to write it on their hearts. The God who delivered them was now teaching them how to live, but not as slaves, but as His chosen people. While Moses was on the mountain with God, the people below grew restless. Days turned into weeks. The fire still burned on Sinai's peak, but they began to wonder, is Moses ever coming back? Fear crept in, doubt whispered. They came to Aaron and said, "Make us gods to lead us. We don't know what happened to Moses." Aaron gathered their gold, the same gold God had given them when they left Egypt, and melted it into a calf. The people cheered, danced, and shouted, "These are our gods who brought us out of Egypt." The sound of celebration echoed through the camp, but in heaven, it was heartbreak. High above, God said to Moses, "Go down. The people have corrupted themselves." Moses descended the mountain, carrying the stone tablets, the very words of God. As he saw the idol and the dancing, anger burned within him. He threw the tablets to the ground, shattering them at the foot of the mountain. The people's sin had broken their covenant with God, just as surely as those stones had broken. Moses destroyed the idol and cried out to the Lord for mercy. "Please forgive their sin." or blot me out from your book. God's judgment was real, but so was his grace. He told Moses to lead the people onward, though the journey would now be harder and trust would take time to rebuild. Even after failure, God did not abandon his people. His promise still stood. The golden calf showed how quickly hearts can wander, but it also revealed something greater. Even when we let go of him, God never lets go of us. The camp was quiet after the storm of rebellion. Shame hung heavy, but God was not finished with his people. Moses pitched a small tent outside the camp, a place to meet with God face to face. Every time he entered, a pillar of cloud descended. The people would stand and watch in silence, knowing that mercy still spoke from heaven. Inside that sacred space, Moses cried, "If your presence doesn't go with us, don't send us forward." And God replied, "My presence will go with you, and I will give you rest." The covenant was renewed. The tablets were rewritten. God's glory once again covered his people, not because they were perfect, but because his love never failed. Soon the tent of meeting became the tabernacle, a place where God's spirit would dwell among them. The same cloud that once filled the mountain now filled the camp. The same fire that once frightened them now guided them by night. Moses looked out over the people, weary, flawed, but chosen. Their journey wasn't over, it was just beginning, and so it is with us. Even when we fall short, God rebuilds what's broken. His presence goes with us still. If this story touched your heart, remember, his glory still returns to every repentant soul. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Faith in Every Step, and share it with someone who needs to know that God never leaves the ones he loves. Because this story isn't just Israel's, it's ours, and his glory is still coming down.